Have you ever sat quietly and wondered when everything started to change between you and your children? Not in the loud, obvious way, but in the small, quiet ways. The way their tone shifted from warmth to obligation. The way they stopped asking for your opinion and started giving you instructions. Like you were slowly becoming invisible in your own story. It's not always cruel. In fact, sometimes it's wrapped in kindness. But it still hurts, doesn't it? I remember Helen once telling me that her grandson used to run into her arms every time she visited. He used to squeal when he saw me, she said, like I was magic. But now, even her grown daughter barely looks up when she walks in the room. They greet her, yes, but not with delight. Not with that spark that says, "You matter here." And slowly, you begin to shrink a little inside. If you felt this, I want you to know you are not alone. And more importantly, this isn't the end of your story. This video isn't about demanding respect or about fixing others. It's about rediscovering something far more powerful. The quiet dignity that comes when you stop doing the things that steal your own light. That's the real path to respect. Not louder words or stricter rules, but calmer, deeper changes. There's something deeply powerful about a person who knows who they are, especially after 60. And that power begins when you stop trying to be everything to everyone. Take Margaret, for example. She was the kind of mother who never said no. When her son Ryan divorced, she practically raised her granddaughter single-handedly while also cooking for him, doing his laundry, and loaning him money even when it strained her own retirement savings. "I thought," she whispered once, "that if I just kept giving, they'd see me as indispensable." But what happened was the opposite. They didn't mean to take her for granted. It just slowly became the expectation. And the more she gave, the more invisible she became. That's the first quiet truth I want to share. After 60, stop sacrificing your peace to buy affection. Real love doesn't come with receipts. The more you trade your own well-being just to keep the family running, the more you teach them that your needs don't matter. And eventually, they believe you. It doesn't have to be this way. Margaret started doing something radical. She paused. She didn't stop helping. She just stopped rushing to say yes. When her son called late at night to ask her to babysit, she gently said, "I love you, but I have plans tomorrow morning. I need rest tonight." At first, Ryan was surprised. He even got a little irritated. But over time, something strange happened. He started saying thank you more. Started asking, "Is this okay with you?" That's respect. And it didn't come from yelling. It came from a quiet boundary held with grace. The second thing that steals our respect, especially in later years, is apologizing for existing. I see this more often than people realize. Older adults who enter rooms with hunched shoulders and soft voices, who say sorry for asking a question, or for needing help, or even just for being present. Somewhere along the way, they started believing the lie that they're a burden. But let me ask you something. Would you ever tell your own mother that she was a burden just because she needed help with the TV remote or asked for a ride to the doctor? Would you tell her she should feel ashamed for growing older? Of course not. So why do we tell it to ourselves? Frank, a gentleman who had worked in engineering for 40 years, told me once that he dreaded family dinners, not because he didn't love his kids, but because he always felt like he was in the way. He would sit quietly at the table, offer to help, and then retreat to the couch, while the younger ones chatted in the kitchen. "They don't mean to ignore me," he said. "But I can feel it. I'm fading out of the picture." But one Thanksgiving, something shifted. His granddaughter Chloe came to sit beside him and asked him about a project he'd worked on long ago. He lit up, his voice came alive again, and slowly, others joined in. By the end of the night, Frank was telling stories that had everyone listening. Not because he forced his way in, but because he stopped apologizing for being part of the room. There's a kind of quiet authority that comes when we sit up straighter, when we make eye contact, when we stop whispering our truth, and most importantly, when we stop saying sorry for things that aren't wrong. You are not a mistake. Your presence is not something to be apologized for. There's a third pattern I see often, and it's a hard one to unlearn. Trying too hard to stay relevant. Maybe you felt this too. Trying to keep up with their slang, their technology, their trends, not because you enjoy it, but because you're scared of being left behind. Sophie used to rehearse jokes before family dinners. Not because she found them funny, but because she wanted her grandchildren to think she was cool. She downloaded every app they mentioned, even if it confused her. And still, the phone calls didn't come any more often. The visits didn't last longer. Then one day, her youngest grandson came over after a hard day at school. Instead of trying to impress him, she just listened. No jokes, no filters, just real, steady presence. And he opened up in a way he never had before. That's when she realized, they don't need you to be impressive, they need you to be real. We spend so much time trying to catch up with them that we forget the value of walking at our own pace and inviting them to slow down and walk beside us. You don't need to compete with the energy of youth to be loved. You don't need to become someone else to be respected. You don't need to become someone else to be respected. But sometimes, without even realizing it, we bend ourselves out of shape again and again just to keep the peace. We say yes when we want to say no. We bite our tongue even when something feels unfair. We let things slide, tell ourselves it's not worth the trouble, and in doing so, we quietly disappear a little more each day. Helen once told me, "I've become a guest in my own family." She didn't mean it. Literally, she still attended birthdays, cooked at holidays, showed up to help whenever someone called. But in every room, she felt like a visitor, polite, careful, invisible. And part of that came from a lifetime of people-pleasing. She had spent so many years making sure everyone else was comfortable that she forgot she was allowed to take up space too. We think we're being kind, and we are. But there's a difference between kindness and erasing ourselves. Helen once shared that her daughter Emily had asked her to cancel a long-awaited lunch with her old friends so she could babysit last minute. "I didn't even hesitate," Helen said. "I just said yes, like always. But inside, I was resentful. I missed a moment I was truly looking forward to." It wasn't the first time. It had become a pattern. And worse, Emily never even asked if she had plans. Because Helen never made her plans known. Respect doesn't grow in silence. It grows in clarity. When you speak up gently but firmly, you teach others that your time, your energy, and your joy matter. The next time Emily called, Helen tried something different. "I'd love to help," she said, "but I've already made a commitment. Let me know earlier next time I want to be there for you. But I also need to care for my own life." And just like that, the dynamic began to shift. Emily wasn't angry. She was surprised, maybe even a little ashamed that she hadn't thought to ask before. But most importantly, she started seeing Helen as a person with a life of her own again. And that recognition, that shift in how someone sees you, is where real respect begins. Another quiet pattern that steals respect, avoiding conflict at all costs. Now, I'm not talking about shouting or drama. I'm talking about the kind of quiet avoidance that settles deep into the bones. The way you tell yourself, it's not worth it when your son speaks to you with a tone that stings. Or when your daughter-in-law forgets your birthday again and you pretend not to care. Even though it hurts. Jack, a man with kind eyes and a quiet voice, once said, "I hate confrontation, always have, so I just let things go." But after a while, I realized I was letting go of myself. That's the cost. Every time we swallow pain without naming it, we bury a little piece of our truth. And over time, those buried pieces pile up until one day, we no longer recognize our own reflection. Jack told me about a moment when he finally broke that pattern. His adult son had made a hurtful comment at dinner, something small, but cutting a jab about his memory. Usually, Jack would have laughed it off, but that night, he simply looked up and said, "That comment felt unkind. I know you didn't mean it that way, but I'd appreciate if you didn't speak to me like that." It wasn't angry, it wasn't dramatic, but it was honest. And for the first time in a long time, his son apologized, not just with words, but with softness in his eyes. From that day on, the teasing stopped, and Jack began to stand a little taller. Respect is not about always being agreeable. It's about being real even when it's uncomfortable. Especially when it's uncomfortable, there's a strength that comes with calm honesty. It doesn't push others away. It draws them closer because they know where they stand with you. And in a world full of noise and pretense, that kind of truth is rare. It's magnetic. But here's something even subtler. something most of us don't even notice we're doing. Waiting for permission to live fully. Maybe you've said something like, "I don't want to travel alone. I'll wait until someone offers to go with me." Or, "I'd love to take that dance class, but I'm too old for that now." Or even, "It would be selfish to do something just for myself." Where did we learn that joy must be earned? That dreams expire after a certain birthday? Grace, a retired teacher, had always wanted to learn painting, but she spent years telling herself it was impractical, that she should spend her time helping with the grandkids, organizing the house, cooking meals. "It felt like I needed permission to do something just for me," she said. But one quiet Tuesday, she picked up a brush, no fanfare, no audience, just colors and canvas and the quiet permission of her own heart. A few months later, her family started noticing the paintings. Then they started asking about them. Then, finally, her granddaughter asked if they could paint together. What began as a solo act of courage became a bridge, not by trying to win approval, but by living in truth. That's the paradox, isn't it? The more we chase validation, the more it slips away. But the moment we start honoring our own soul, not out of rebellion, but out of reverence, the world around us begins to pay attention. You don't have to ask anyone's permission to shine. And here's something beautiful. When you stop trying to prove your worth, people begin to see it more clearly. Not because you demanded it, but because you finally believed it yourself. In the quiet moments, sipping tea by the window, tending the garden, reading your favorite book, there is a kind of grace that doesn't need to be explained. A kind of dignity that doesn't depend on who calls or who forgets. It lives inside you. And when you begin to live from that place, that rooted, calm, steady self, others begin to respond. Not always immediately, not always perfectly, but something shifts. It starts small, a pause, a softer tone, a thank you that feels real, a question that says, "I want to know what you think." Respect doesn't return with a bang. It returns like morning light, quietly, persistently, and with growing warmth. Respect returns like morning light, quietly, persistently, and with growing warmth. It's strange, isn't it? How the very moment we stop chasing after love, after recognition, after some sign that we still matter, is often the moment others begin to see us again. Not out of guilt, not out of pity, but because something in us has changed. Ethan, a quiet man in his 70s, told me something I'll never forget. He said, "I used to wait for my children to visit, so I could feel alive again. But now, I live in such a way that when they do visit, they walk into a home that's already full of life." He didn't say that with pride or bitterness. He said it with peace. What changed wasn't his children, it was him. He stopped organizing his days around their calls, their needs, their silence. Instead, he started gardening again, reading poetry, volunteering once a week at the library, where he helped little kids sound out words. At first, he said, he felt selfish. "Shouldn't I be available in case they need me?" he asked himself. But over time, something beautiful happened. He realized they weren't calling more or less, but when they did, he was no longer anxious, no longer hungry for affirmation. He was calm, rooted, and that energy, that quiet joy began to draw them closer. That's what living the change looks like. When you stop proving your worth and simply live it, others begin to adjust to your presence differently. They feel it. They may not even understand why, but they sense the shift. Grace, the woman who started painting again, shared that her daughter began asking her for advice again. "Not because I pushed," she said, "but because I wasn't always available at their beck and call anymore. I think they realized I have a life, and maybe I have wisdom they've overlooked. Sometimes, the only way to be heard is to stop speaking for a moment. Let silence show them what they're missing." But this isn't about strategy. It's not a trick. It's about restoration. You see, for many of us, the years after 60 come with a strange identity shift. We retire, our homes grow quiet, our bodies change, and often, without realizing it, we hand over the pen, we let others write the rest of our story. But here's the truth. This is your chapter to reclaim. You can live with color again. You can create new rhythms, try new things, meet new people. You don't need to be needed to be worthy. You don't need to be constantly available to prove your value. Frank, remember him. the one who sat quietly at family dinners. He started hosting Sunday morning coffee at his place. Nothing fancy, just fresh brew, some pastries, maybe a few old jazz records playing in the background. He didn't beg anyone to come. He simply opened the space, and slowly, they did. His sons, his grandkids, even neighbors, not out of obligation, but because something about it felt peaceful, real, whole. That's the magnetism of someone who is no longer waiting to be invited into life, but who is already living it on their own terms. There's one more story I want to share. Chloe, a widow in her late 60s, used to feel deeply isolated. Her children lived in different cities. Holidays were short and full of polite smiles, and she often found herself scrolling through old photos, wondering, did I already live the best parts of my life? One day, she joined a local walking group. Not because she expected friendship, but because she wanted to move her body, to feel the air again. To her surprise, she met others just like her. They laughed, shared recipes, talked about books. One of them even helped her start a small blog, where she wrote reflections on aging, on solitude, on grace. Her daughter stumbled upon the blog one day. "Mom," she said over the phone, "I didn't know you had so much to say." Chloe smiled. "Neither did I," she replied. Respect doesn't always return in the ways we expect. Sometimes, it doesn't come from our children first. Sometimes, it comes from rediscovering ourselves and letting the world take notice when it's ready. And if they don't, that's okay too, because there's a kind of respect that runs deeper than applause. It's the kind you give yourself. When you stop apologizing, when you stop shrinking, when you stop waiting to be chosen and choose yourself instead, that kind of self-respect becomes visible. It doesn't demand attention, but it draws it. It's there in the way you walk into a room, the way you say no without guilt, the way you smile at yourself in the mirror and mean it. You don't need to be loud to be heard. You only need to stand firmly in your light, and that light, it's still there. Even if others have forgotten it, even if you've forgotten it, it's there beneath the exhaustion, the caregiving, the long silences, the too quick goodbyes. It's never too late to come home to yourself. Never too late to stop giving all your power away. Never too late to choose peace over pleasing, dignity over silence, joy over guilt. Your life is not a leftover. It is not the quiet ending of someone else's louder story. It is the full, bright, burning middle of your own. And you are allowed, no, you are meant to live it fully. If you're still here with me truly, thank you. It means something, you know, that you stayed, that you listened, that something in these quiet reflections resonated with something deep inside you. Maybe it was a moment you recognized, like sitting at a dinner table and feeling invisible. Or maybe it was the tiredness that comes from always saying yes when your heart whispers no. Or maybe, just maybe, it was the ache of realizing you've spent years giving everything and receiving very little in return. If that's been your path, if any part of this feels like your story, I want you to hear me now. With no hesitation, you are not alone, you are not forgotten, and you are absolutely not too late. I wish I could sit across from you right now, maybe with a warm cup of tea between us. I wish I could hear your voice, your laughter, even your silence. I wish you could tell me what part of this touched you and what you've been carrying for far too long. And while I may not be able to sit with you in person, I hope this video felt like a kind of presence, like someone finally seeing you again. Not for what you can do or give, but for who you are, deep beneath it all. If you're ready, I'd love to invite you to share something in the comments, something simple, something true. Has your relationship with your adult children changed over time? What helped you grow through it? Or what are you still figuring out? It doesn't have to be perfect, it just has to be real. When we tell our stories, even in small pieces, we remind each other that our experiences matter, that we matter. And you do. If this message helped you feel seen even a little, I'd love for us to stay connected. Click the subscribe button if you want to keep walking this journey with me. Not just for tips or advice, but for reminders like this. You are worthy, you are whole, and you don't need to chase anyone to be respected. You've given so much in your life, raised others, carried burdens, built homes, families, dreams. Now it's your turn to come home to yourself. And as you do, You might find something beautiful happening around you. They'll begin to notice. They'll begin to listen. They'll begin to respect the strength in your softness, the calm in your boundaries, the wisdom in your quiet joy. But even if they don't, even if they never fully understand all you've carried, you will, and that's enough. Thank you for letting me share this time with you. Thank you for choosing to listen, to reflect, and maybe just maybe to begin again. I'll see you in the next story. Until then, walk gently with yourself. You've earned it.